So we talked about the Oceanic class and we've discussed the specifics of the Teutonic class, but today let's take a closer look at the Teutonic herself, what made her so special, and why she really did have this massive impact on the North Atlantic trade. Let's talk about the story of the RMS Teutonic. Like most White Star liners, the RMS Teutonic was built in Belfast, Ireland at Harland and Wolff shipbuilders, with the entire ship, engines, and all being built there, unlike the Oceanic class, which we already discussed. She was launched from her slipway on January 19th, 1889, and would be finished July 25th of that same year. However, her maiden voyage wouldn't be until August 7th. She'd be brought to Liverpool initially and given a conversion into a armed merchant cruiser for presentation at the Spithead Naval Review. Now, this is one of her most famous moments in history, as a lot of ocean liner nerds tend to remember her for, because when she was at the Spithead Naval Review, she was toured by Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was the Emperor of Germany, and by the way, that tour was hosted by Albert Edward, who would go on to be King Edward of Britain circa 1902, the early 1910s. Anyway, during that tour, Kaiser Wilhelm is quoted as saying, "We need some of these," and it's said that that sort of initial enthusiasm led to the construction of the Kaiser class of liners, the four-funneled liners that would come in the late 1890s, and sort of set off the massive expansion in ship sizes that we saw up until the First World War, and some even credit that for being one of the causes of the First World War. Now, I think that's a lot of credit to give Teutonic, but still, it's impressive, the impact she had on maritime history. But her impact didn't end there. After the completion of the Spithead Naval Review, she was stripped of her weapons and, I believe later that same day or within a few days, began her maiden voyage, which left Liverpool on August 7th, 1889. Now, this followed the sort of standard North Atlantic route for the White Star Line, where they'd leave Liverpool, stop over in Queenstown, Ireland, and make their way to New York. Now, the Teutonic and her sister Majestic allowed the White Star Line to finally have 4 ships operating on that route. That meant that they could operate one ship each day. During each season, Teutonic would make in between 11 and 14 crossings per season, and she would sail on average about once or twice a month. It's also worth noting that, like all White Star liners, the Teutonic and her sister the Majestic proved really popular with Irish immigrants because these ships were made in Ireland. They saw these ships as a point of Irish pride, and as such, many of them were more than happy to pick these ships over competing lines. And early on in her career, the Teutonic quickly gained a few rivals. The first one that we're going to discuss is her own sister, the Majestic, where Teutonic and Majestic would sort of compete against each other for the speed record. Now, Majestic would initially seize the speed record during a crossing in August of 1891, but Teutonic wouldn't let that stand. 2 weeks later, on August 19th, Teutonic would seize the blue ribbon from her sister, claiming the title of the fastest ship on the Atlantic. The Majestic would never take that title back from her sister, and the Teutonic would become the last White Star liner to ever hold the blue ribbon. Another ship that the Teutonic had a huge rivalry with was the SS City of New York, an Inman Line liner. The City of New York was, at the time, considered one of the fastest ships in the world, and that title was taken by the Teutonic twins, and the Teutonic and the City of New York would end up racing each other back and forth across the Atlantic throughout much of the 1890s. And it's worth noting that a lot of these are literal races. The Teutonic and the City of New York would leave New York at almost the same time, and their captains would race each other across the Atlantic. On August 14th, 1890, the Teutonic would actually beat the New York's record and beat the New York in a race by over 3 hours after arriving in Queenstown, Ireland after just a little over 5 days. On January 8th, 1895, the Teutonic was involved in a very dramatic rescue in high seas and winter conditions on the North Atlantic. While crossing, she saw the two-masted schooner, the Josie Reeves, struggling in the high surf and opted to attempt to provide assistance. However, the Teutonic found this rather challenging. The crew of the Teutonic tried to launch their own lifeboats to rescue the 9 crew members of the Josie Reeves. However, they found it impossible to reach the stricken ship as the sea state was just too high, forcing the Teutonic to come alongside the stricken schooner and the crew of the schooner to make their their way over to the Teutonic in their own boats, something that ultimately was successful, and they were able to rescue all 9 members of the Josie Reeves. In 1897, the Teutonic was converted back into an armed merchant cruiser to participate in Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, which would be the second Spithead naval review of her career. However, this so far glorious career would be slightly marred the following year when she was involved in her first collision. On November 21st, 1898, the Teutonic, while sailing in New York Harbor, collided with the United States Lines liner Berlin. Now, this collision was relatively minor, and there was only some scratched paint on Teutonic and no damage on the Berlin. In fact, most passengers on both ships didn't feel it, but it was a collision nonetheless. A few years later, however, Britain found itself enthralled in a military conflict. The Boer War in Africa required British troops to be transported to a far-off continent, and the Teutonic was called up for military service. She was converted to serve as a troop transport and used to bring British troops from Britain to South Africa. During her service as a troop transport, a large wave, either a rogue wave or a tsunami, washed over the vessel, actually washing the 2 lookouts clean off the vessel and into the sea. Both lookouts were recovered successfully, and both of them survived the ordeal. On December 13th, 1903, the Teutonic was struck by lightning during an Atlantic crossing that actually split one of her masts and was so bright that the captain thought there'd been an explosion on board. On July 28th, 1905, there was a fire on board the Teutonic while she was docked in New York. When, well, it did some significant damage to the interior of the ship, it was ultimately repaired and put back to sea not that long after. In June 1907, her route was shifted when she was moved from the Liverpool to Queenstown to New York route to the new White Star Line Express route. This saw White Star liners leaving from Southampton, which was closer to London, and they would leave from Southampton, stop off in Cherbourg, France, before transferring over to Queenstown, Ireland, and then making their way across the Atlantic. This is the route, by the way, that the Titanic would take just a few years later, but that's beside the point. Teutonic, Majestic, and several other ships were moved to this route as this became the White Star Line's new primary transatlantic route. On August 16, 1907, it was reported that one of the stokers jumped overboard just a few days earlier, supposedly driven insane by the heat. He was actually plucked out of the water by a lifeboat and did survive. On June 16, 1909, while sailing from New York to Southampton, she ended up stuck in the mud outside of New York and was stuck there for most of the morning. In May 1911, a new White Star Liner entered service, the famous RMS Olympic, and the Teutonic was seen as redundant on the Southampton to New York route, and thus she was moved to a Britain to Canada route that departed from Liverpool and made its way to Montreal, with her first transatlantic to Canada route departing on May 13, 1911. The following year, after the Titanic disaster, it was erroneously reported that the Teutonic was one of the ships rushing to Titanic's aid, which simply wasn't true. However, the next year, she would have her own encounter with an iceberg. On October 22nd, 1913, while crossing from Montreal towards Liverpool, the Teutonic spotted an iceberg dead ahead. The order was given for engines to be put full astern and the ship to begin turning, and ultimately it's reported that the Teutonic just missed the iceberg and managed to continue on her voyage. In 1914, an Austrian Archduke is shot and the world went to war, and the Teutonic once again found herself in military service, this time being converted to an armed merchant cruiser to serve with the Royal Navy. A job that she actually did carry out, having her guns placed on her decks and assuming the role of an armed merchant cruiser as a convoy escort. During the war, she would occasionally serve as a troop ship herself, but she actually spent most of the war serving with the 10th Cruiser Squadron as an armed merchant cruiser, a role which she actually filled pretty successfully. However, following the war, when she was returned to the White Star Line, they deemed her to be too old to remain in service, and a few years later, in 1921, she was sent to the scrapyards, thus ending the long, illustrious career of the RMS Teutonic, the last White Star Liner to ever hold the blue ribbon. If you'd like to learn more about the Teutonic herself, her sister the Majestic, or the sort of specifications of this class of ship, I'll leave a link up here to a playlist I'm building all about the Teutonic twins and their sort of role as a class. And if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Barbettes and Binnacles, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.